All right, so are you ready for this? We're going deep on a question that's, well, it's both ancient AD, super relevant today.
I like it.
What if we actually, achieved immortality?
Oh, wow.
And I don't just mean, living longer. I mean truly forever.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
And, you sent over some incredible material that tackles this.
Right.
And just skimming it, I got to say, kind of blew my mind.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, it captures the imagination like few others. And this article, it doesn't just speculate on the how of immortality.
Right.
It really digs into, the ripple effects on society, on the planet, even on what it means to be human.
Exactly. It's not even about, wanting to live forever. It's more like, if we did, then what?
Right.
What changes? And get this, we're starting with politics. Buckle up.
It makes sense to me. Immortality throws a wrench into, well, pretty much every system we've got.
Oh, yeah?
And government, prime example.
For sure. Okay, so this article calls it eternal politics.
Yep.
And let me tell you, it paints a pretty wild picture. The first thing that, jumped out at me was this idea of leaders clinging to power for centuries. I mean, imagine a president serving for 200 years.
Term limits would need, I think, a serious rethink.
Oh, absolutely.
But even then, you've got this potential. It's almost like power consolidation on a scale we can't even imagine.
Right.
Someone leading for that long, they could build up these networks of influence that are just impossible to challenge.
Yeah, and wouldn't that create the craziest generation gaps?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, a leader who's been in charge for centuries, they might completely lose touch with the needs and values of those who are, say, only 150 years old.
The whole concept of generational turnover, which kind of drives our current systems, that would be completely upended.
Okay.
You could have these massive ideological divides between, those who've lived through wildly different eras, each holding on to power and perspectives that just seem alien to the others.
It's like trying to explain dial-up internet to someone who's grown up with, instant virtual reality.
Yeah.
That gap in understanding would be immense.
Huge. And the article goes even further. It suggests that laws themselves would have to get, really strange.
Okay, like what?
Think about population control.
Okay.
If people aren't dying, you could need government permission just to have kids.
Oh, wow.
Just to avoid, overcrowding.
That's a level of control I hadn't even considered.
Yeah.
It's almost like we gain freedom from death, but then maybe we sacrifice other freedoms in the process.
It is. That's the paradox, right, of immortality. It makes us re-examine that balance between individual liberty and the needs of a society that could, theoretically exist forever.
Okay, so politics is already a minefield, but let's move on to how this impacts, everyone on a personal level. The article calls this social changes. And this is where things get really interesting and maybe a bit overwhelming.
Well, think about family dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
With immortality in the mix, you're talking family spanning centuries. Oh, my God.
With, great-great-great-great-grandparents still actively involved in everyone's lives.
So holiday dinners would be, a never-ending reunion.
It's possible.
And would those family roles even make sense anymore? I mean, would we still see elders as these wise figures?
That's a great question.
When everyone has potentially centuries of experience?
I mean, our respect for elders, it's often tied to their experience and knowledge, right? But in an immortal society, that equation gets flipped.
Right.
A 200-year-old might be considered quite young compared to someone who's 500.
It makes you wonder how respect and authority would even work. Would it be based on, accumulated knowledge or specific skills?
Yeah.
Or something else entirely?
Yeah, who knows? And think about relationships, too.
Oh, yeah.
Till death do us part. Well, that takes on a whole new meaning when death is off the table.
Right.
Would people even form lifelong partnerships? Or would they cycle through relationships over centuries, constantly seeking, new experiences? Oh, it's almost like the pressure of finding the one would disappear.
Right.
But then you'd have to navigate potentially centuries of breakups and makeups.
It's true. Oh, my goodness. And don't forget about learning.
Oh, yeah, learning.
In a world where you could potentially live forever, the idea of education being confined to a few years of school, it just seems absurd.
Yep, it's like, congratulations, you graduated college. Now get ready for another 500 years of classes.
Right.
But seriously, would we be constantly learning and adapting and reinventing ourselves throughout these indefinitely long lives?
I mean, lifelong learning wouldn't just be a catchphrase. It would be essential for survival. Think about it.
Yeah.
The rate at which technology, knowledge, even social norms could evolve over centuries.
Yeah.
You'd have to be constantly updating your skills, your knowledge, just to keep up.
Which brings us to the economic side of things.
Hmm.
And this is where, honestly, I start to get a little nervous.
I hear that.
The article calls this economic development. And it suggests our current models of work and retirement they wouldn't cut it.
Exactly. I mean, with no set endpoint for a career,
Yeah.
the whole concept of a 40-year work life followed by retirement just wouldn't make sense.
So no more gold watch at 65.
Right.
I'm kind of relieved, but also terrified.
I don't understand.
What would replace it? Would we work for centuries?
Who knows?
Take, extended sabbaticals. Invent entirely new ways to structure our economic lives.
It's possible. The article explores a few possibilities. One is a shift towards what it calls a leisure society,
Okay.
where work becomes less about necessity and more about pursuing passions
Okay.
and contributing to society in meaningful ways.
Okay, that sounds kind of idyllic. But how would we sustain ourselves? Would we all have robot butlers and, universal basic income?
Well, that's where things get tricky. Even with advanced technology, sustaining an immortal population would require, careful management of resources.
Right.
And a fundamental shift in how we think about consumption and growth.
And that brings us to what might be the biggest challenge of all.
Oh.
The environmental impact of a world where nobody dies.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Sustainability becomes absolutely paramount. Think about it.
Yeah.
If we're already struggling to manage resources for a population that's constantly being replenished,
Yeah.
imagine the strain on the planet with a population that's only growing.
It's like throwing an eternal party on a planet with finite resources.
Yeah.
At some point, something's got to give, right?
That's the question the article raises. It highlights the need for radical innovations in renewable energy, resource conservation, even things like urban planning.
Mm.
We'd have to design cities that are incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
Cities that can accommodate potentially billions of people all living indefinitely.
So vertical farms, underground cities, maybe even floating habitats. This is starting to sound like a science fiction novel.
Well, the article suggests that science fiction might not be that far off from reality. It even touches on the idea of space exploration as a potential solution.
How?
If Earth can't sustain an immortal population, maybe we'd have to look to other planets.
Wow, so we've gone from worrying about retirement to colonizing Mars.
Right.
It's clear that immortality would have a ripple effect on a global scale.
Yeah,
And we've only just scratched the surface.
it's true. The article also delves into the philosophical, cultural, even spiritual implications of living forever, which are just as mind-boggling as the practical considerations.
All right, I am officially hooked. We'll be back in part 2 of this deep dive to explore those very topics, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to our deep dive into immortality.
Okay, so last time we were talking
We
about
explored the practical side, right?
yeah, the practical implications
Yeah.
of living forever.
Right.
From the upheaval in our political systems to the strain on our planet's resources.
Right, all of that.
And if your mind isn't already sufficiently blown, get ready.
Okay.
Because now we're going to delve into the even more abstract, even more philosophical side of this.
Right. And the article doesn't shy away from the big questions.
No, it does not.
What happens to our sense of time,
Right.
our art, our belief systems, all of that?
Okay, so the article calls this section philosophical and cultural impact.
Okay.
And it starts by talking about our relationship with time.
Yeah.
And if we're living forever, does the concept of a deadline even mean anything anymore?
It's so interesting to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would we become incredibly patient,
Right.
taking centuries to achieve our goals? Or would
Wow.
we become even more prone to procrastination?
Oh, God.
Knowing we have literally an eternity to get things done.
It's on one hand, you can finally write that novel you've been dreaming of. But on the other hand, maybe you'd also just spend centuries binge watching every TV show ever made. I know I'd be tempted.
It's very possible. And what about the impact on creativity?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
And art. I mean, some might argue that art is born from our awareness of mortality.
Yeah.
That it's a way of grappling with, the fleeting nature of life.
Right.
So would art even lose its meaning if we lived forever?
Yeah, you can see that.
Yeah.
Would tragic love stories still resonate if there's no real sense of loss or finality?
Right.
Would we even be able to relate to characters who die?
It's a good question. But the article, it kind of suggests that art might actually become even more profound.
Really?
Yeah. exploring themes that we can't even grasp right now. Imagine a symphony that's composed over centuries,
Wow.
reflecting the changing emotions and experiences of an immortal composer, or a painting that captures like the sweep of history through the eyes of someone who's actually witnessed it all.
Okay, I can see that. It's like instead of art being a reflection on the end of life,
Right.
it becomes a meditation on the experience of living itself.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And what about religion and spirituality? Oh, interesting.
I mean, the article suggests that immortality would force a massive reassessment of our belief systems.
Yeah, like, does the concept of heaven even make sense?
Right.
If we're already living in a kind of earthly paradise. Or would new religions emerge
It's possible.
based on the challenges and opportunities of an immortal existence?
It certainly is. Maybe we'd see religions focused on, like, the pursuit of knowledge,
Yeah.
or the cultivation of wisdom over millennia, or perhaps even the very concept of faith would change as we grapple with the, tangible reality of living forever.
So we've got philosophers pondering the meaning of eternity, artists creating works that span generations,
Uh-huh.
religions are trying to make sense of a world without death. It's a lot to process.
It is. And we're not done yet. The article also goes on to explore the ethical dilemmas that immortality would raise. And this is where things get really complex.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, for starters, think about access to immortality.
Okay.
Would it be available to everyone?
Or only to the wealthy and powerful. If it's not equally accessible, you're essentially creating like a two-tiered society. Those who are immortal and those who are not.
And that raises all sorts of questions about fairness and justice, like, would a life sentence for a crime even be a deterrent?
It's a good question.
If the criminal could potentially live forever, would we need entirely new systems of punishment and rehabilitation?
Exactly. The very notion of justice would have to be rethought in a world where life and death are no longer like the defining parameters.
And what about the mental and emotional implications of living forever? I mean, it sounds great in theory, but wouldn't there be a risk of becoming, like, jaded, bored, even despairing after centuries of existence?
An article touches on that as well. It talks about the potential for what it calls existential fatigue that could set in.
Oh, gosh.
Especially if we haven't figured out how to create, like, meaning and purpose in a life that has no natural end.
It's like, imagine experiencing the same cycle of seasons, the same holidays, even the same jokes for centuries on end. At some point, wouldn't it all start to feel a bit repetitive?
I think it would. And think about the weight of memories, too.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Imagine carrying the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and failures of centuries of life.
Would we become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of our past experiences?
It's a good question. It makes you wonder if our brains would even be able to handle that kind of information overload. Would we need to develop new ways to process, store, even erase memories?
It's a fascinating question, and one that the article, honestly, only begins to explore.
You're right.
But it does suggest that mental health care would need to undergo, like, a radical transformation
Oh, absolutely.
to meet the needs of an immortal population.
Yeah.
So instead of therapy focusing on, like, past traumas,
Yeah.
maybe it would be about helping people find meaning in an endless present.
That's one possibility. Or perhaps it would be about, like, learning to manage the vastness of our memories, to, like, curate our past experiences so they enrich our lives rather than burden us.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is all getting very philosophical. It is.
But let's not forget that achieving immortality would also require some serious scientific breakthroughs.
That's true.
And the article doesn't disappoint in that department either.
Right. While immortality wouldn't make us invincible, it would likely drive these incredible advancements in medicine and technology,
Yeah.
aimed at, keeping our eternally youthful bodies healthy and functional.
So forget about Botox. We're talking about nanobots that repair our cells from the inside out.
Exactly. Imagine a world where we could regenerate limbs, cure diseases with a thought, even enhance our physical and mental capabilities beyond anything we can imagine today. Whoa, hold on. Enhancements.
Yeah.
Are we talking super strength, telekinesis, photographic memory? This is starting to sound like a superhero movie.
The possibilities are pretty mind-boggling, but as the article points out, those possibilities also come with a whole new set of ethical considerations.
Of course.
How do we ensure that these enhancements are available to everyone, not just a select few?
And how do we prevent the creation of a society where the enhanced, like a significant advantage over those who are not, that the gap between the haves and the have-nots could become even more extreme?
Absolutely. And that's just one example of the many ethical challenges that immortality would pose. The article goes on to explore everything from the implications for criminal justice
Right.
to the management of, our planet's resources in a world where population growth is no longer constrained by death.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling a bit overwhelmed at this point. It seems like immortality, while potentially amazing, would also create a whole host of problems that we haven't even begun to solve.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Immortality wouldn't just be about living longer. It would be about reimagining every aspect of what it means to be human
Yeah.
and grappling with challenges that are both exhilarating and terrifying.
Well, on that note, I think we need a moment to collect ourselves and prepare for the final part of this deep dive. We'll be back to explore how immortality could impact everything from the way we learn to the future of art and culture. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into immortality. So far, we've covered the political, social, even the existential implications of living forever.
Right. We've explored how it could transform everything, from our family structures to our understanding of time itself.
And if you thought those were mind-blowing, get ready, because now we're venturing into territory that's even more speculative.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. The article doesn't stop at just the individual level.
Right.
It looks at how immortality could shape entire philosophical movements, spiritual practices, even the evolution of culture itself.
Okay, so the article calls this section Philosophical Movements and Spirituality. And I gotta admit, I'm really curious to see where this goes.
Well, just imagine a world where philosophers have centuries to ponder those really big questions.
Yeah.
Would we see entirely new schools of thought emerge, focused on the ethics of eternity, the nature of consciousness in an immortal being, or maybe even the meaning of life when death is no longer a factor?
It's like all those late-night debates about the universe and our place in it, they'd take on a whole new dimension. Instead of arguing for a few hours, you could have these philosophical dialogues spanning generations.
It's true. And think about the impact on organized religion. Would traditional beliefs about the afterlife still hold up in a world where we're essentially living in a kind of earthly forever?
Yeah. I could see new religions popping up, maybe focused on the worship of knowledge, or the pursuit of, perfect wisdom over millennia.
It's possible.
Or maybe even a cult that believes boredom is the ultimate evil.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting thought. But the article also suggests that, existing religions might adapt and evolve.
Yeah.
They might find new ways to interpret their doctrines in light of immortality.
So instead of focusing on, salvation in the afterlife,
Right.
maybe religion would be about finding meaning and purpose in an endlessly unfolding present.
Yeah, that's one way it could go. Or maybe the focus shifts to the ethical challenges of living forever, providing guidance on how to navigate those complexities and live a virtuous life, even when life has no clear endpoint.
So we've got philosophers debating for centuries, religions trying to make sense of eternity. But what about, everyday life? How would culture evolve in a world where people are constantly accumulating new experiences and knowledge?
The article calls this cultural shifts in immortal societies, and it paints a picture that's, fascinating and a little bit daunting, to be honest.
Okay, yeah.
Imagine having centuries to immerse yourself in different cultures, languages, art forms.
But study abroad wouldn't be a semester, it'd be a lifetime or several lifetimes. You could become fluent in dozens of languages, travel to every corner of the world, experience every kind of art and music imaginable.
And think about the impact on artistic creation itself. With no time constraints, artists could dedicate centuries to perfecting their craft. They could create works of unimaginable complexity and depth.
So instead of 3-minute pop songs, we get symphonies that last for days. Or novels that span generations with characters who, evolve and change over centuries.
It's definitely a fascinating possibility. And it's not just about the length of time, but the perspective that comes with living for centuries. Imagine the stories an immortal artist could tell, the insights they could offer into the human condition.
But let's be realistic. Even with all that potential for, cultural richness,
Right.
there'd also be challenges. How do you even begin to educate someone who could potentially live forever?
The article explores that in a section called Education Systems for Eternity, and it suggests that traditional models of schooling, those would be completely inadequate.
Yeah, of course.
Imagine a world where learning isn't confined to a few years of childhood and adolescence, but rather a continuous process that spans centuries.
So no more cramming for exams or stressing about grades. Sign me up. But seriously, what would replace it? Would we have like personalized learning pods, virtual mentors, maybe even direct brain-to-brain knowledge transfer?
Well, the possibilities are pretty much endless, and the article does explore a few of them. One idea is this concept of learning guilds,
Oh, okay.
where individuals with shared interests could come together to study and collaborate over long periods, perhaps even centuries.
Like imagine a master class in painting that lasts for 500 years with
Yeah.
a master who's actually lived through centuries of art history.
Exactly.
That would be amazing.
And think about the potential for interdisciplinary learning. You could dedicate a century to mastering one field, then switch to another, constantly expanding your knowledge and skills.
So instead of being a specialist in one narrow area, you could become a true Renaissance person with expertise in multiple fields, all gained over centuries of focused study.
Exactly. And the article also touches on the potential for technology to revolutionize education. Imagine virtual reality simulations that allow you to experience different historical periods, or AI tutors that can personalize your learning path based on your individual needs and interests.
Okay, so we've covered philosophy, religion, art, education. It seems like immortality would touch every aspect of human culture. But let's not forget, we're still living on this planet with finite resources. How do we ensure sustainability in a world where people are no longer dying?
That's the focus of a section called Environmental Sustainability for Eternal Populations, and it's honestly one of the most crucial challenges that an immortal society would face.
Yeah, it's like all the amazing cultural advancements we've been talking about, they'd be meaningless if we don't have a planet to live on.
Exactly. The article stresses the need for radical innovation. In areas like renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, waste management, we'd have to find ways to meet the needs of a growing population without depleting the planet's resources.
So vertical farms, zero-waste cities, maybe even fusion power. We're talking about a complete transformation of our relationship with the environment.
And the article even suggests we might need to look beyond Earth itself.
Whoa!
It mentions terraforming other planets, perhaps even colonizing distant star systems, as potential solutions to the long-term challenges of sustaining an immortal population.
Wow, we've gone from worrying about overpopulation to becoming like a multi-planetary species.
Yeah.
Immortality really does push the boundaries of what's possible, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And with that expansion into the cosmos comes a whole new set of challenges and opportunities. The article concludes with a section on conflict and cooperation in a timeless world. And it acknowledges that even with all the potential benefits of immortality, human nature wouldn't just, disappear.
So instead of fighting over land or resources, we'll be battling for control of entire planets. Seems like the stakes just got a whole lot higher.
There's definitely that risk, but the article also suggests that immortality could foster a greater sense of, long-term thinking.
Oh, good.
Cooperation.
Okay.
With that perspective of centuries, maybe we'd be less inclined to engage in these short-sighted conflicts.
Right.
And more focused on finding solutions that benefit all of humanity, present and future.
Okay, that's a bit more optimistic. So after all of this, where do you stand? Is immortality a utopia or a dystopia? Blessing or a curse?
That's the question the article leaves us with, really. And it's one that I think each of us has to answer for ourselves. Immortality would be a game changer, for better or for worse. It would force us to confront our deepest fears and aspirations, to redefine what it means to be human, and to consider our place in the vastness of time and space.
This has been quite the journey. And honestly, I'm still processing everything we've discussed. It's clear that immortality isn't just about living longer.
No.
It's about reimagining every aspect of human existence.
Absolutely. And that's perhaps the most exciting and daunting aspect of it all.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into immortality. And to our listener, we want to hear your thoughts. What resonates with you? What excites you? What terrifies you? Share your insights and keep the conversation going.